Welcome to the business of representation. It's a conversation that we're having today. Um, it's going to be an awesome conversation with some amazing guests. We're going to be talking mostly about the intersection of entertainment, business, social justice, and identity. And for those of you who are new to the American Needs You community, just a little bit about ANY. ANY is an amazing organization that fights for the mobility of ambitious first generation college students. And we do this by providing transformative mentorship and intensive career development. So one-to-one mentors, as well as a pipeline to internships. And we're here today with a couple of the co-founders of Reverie, which is an amazing platform. It's a community that's made up of diverse group of queer, allied, and multicultural filmmakers, artists, musicians, creators, and visionaries. Got to have the vision for creating a community that amplifies the voices of a community that's not often heard. And they do this through multimedia platforms, as well as different types of formats and storytelling. My name is Dr. Theo. I'm only here for a little bit today. My pronouns are he, him, his, but I do want to introduce you to a couple of the folks that you see on your screens right now. So again, my job today is just to introduce our guests and the co-facilitator for today. So our co-facilitator for today is Miss Emily Flores. She is a 2020 ANY Fellow. She's currently a junior at Cal State University Northridge, and she's studying entertainment media and cultural anthropology. And she's interested in the intersection of entertainment, business, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you might hear the words DEI every now and again, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she'll be leading this panel today with Damian Pelliccioni and Aaliyah J. Daniels, some of the co-founders of Reverie. So let me tell you a little bit about Damian and then Aaliyah, and then I'm gonna step out of the way and let the magic happen. So Damian is one of Business Insider's Power Player execs, and he is the CEO of Reverie. And of course, Reverie is the groundbreaking new LGBTQ digital content streaming service, which now reaches over 225 million people across the globe. Fancy. And Aaliyah J. Daniels has found her niche at the intersection of entrepreneurship and entertainment, as well as social impact. And she's the co-founder and chief operating officer, so COO, for Reverie. And her personal mission is to create avenues for authentic representation in media and business. So with that, I'm going to step out of the way and let greatness step forth and have Emily start with a few questions. After we have our questions asked for today, feel free to ask some Q&A as well. We've saved some time for that. And be sure to ask questions in the chat. I'll try to track them down and make sure that we can all connect on them afterwards as well. So definitely use this time to connect not only with the people on screen, but the people in the chat as well. So Emily, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Theo, for those lovely introductions. Thank you to our panelists for giving us a bit of their time today. We really appreciate it. To start with the first question, this could be for both of you, or Damian, if you would like to take this one on. What is Reverie and what makes it different from other companies and other platforms?
First of all, thank you so much for having us here. This is really exciting. These are the moments, and Aaliyah, I'm sure, is going to nod her head and agree with me, that matter more than any other panel that we do, because we get to connect with the next generation, really the people who are going to lead our company forward. So it's exciting, and thank you for everyone joining online. And a little history, Theo and I have known each other for over a decade, and I knew him before he was a doctor. So this is pretty cool. I'm so glad that we get to be in this capacity together so publicly. I love you, Theo. So answering your question, sorry, Emily, going back, Reverie is the world's first and now largest LGBTQ multicultural impact mission driven TV networks. We are 4 equal co-founders. Actually, you only have half of the co-founding team here. There are 2 people missing, not missing, they're just in action right now. But Aaliyah J. Daniels, of course, the COO, who you know, but Chris Rodriguez, our chief business officer, is Latinx man, and LaShawn McGee, an Army veteran, and also our chief product officer. So what makes us really, I think, unique is from our founding team that we believe representation starts from leadership and it starts from ownership, right? And we equally co-own this business. No one owns more equity than the other person. And we wanted to exude that from the top down because we believe that's where real innovation lives. Whether it is in media and actually, to be honest, in any sector, I challenge anyone who's watching or who sees this, who is an executive, a C-suite, or a founder, or is thinking about creating their own startup, think about representation from ownership, diversify that and make sure that it's being led by all different walks of life, because that's really the next for the future. Reverie now is the largest platform in the world, like I mentioned, for LGBTQ, specifically kind of multicultural content. We are reaching over now 250 million households and devices. And I think what makes us very unique is that content that you find is not just movies and TV shows and music videos and news and podcasts, but it's reflective of what our community really is, which is a community of communities. We're not one culture, we're not one race, we're not one gender, we're not one sexual orientation, we're not one language. And I think that's what makes us really unique. This community specifically, the LGBTQ community, is encompassing of everyone. And look, we even don't really use LGBTQ anymore. We adopt the word queer. Queer is more encompassing of even our allies. Allies are the reason why we even are here, right? Like allies make up our community, and it's a big part of them, and they can identify now as part of our community, like Aaliyah, who is an ally, and they're still part of this mission, because at the end of the day, it's really about how we are saving lives, how we're impacting the global community, whether it's ally, cis or trans, doesn't matter, any of those intersectionalities, to be able to see what our community, what the queer community really is. And I think that, to me, is the most exciting thing that we get to do every day, is impact how the world sees our community.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I do have a follow-up question for you. Can you talk about your journey to CEO and what, I guess, propelled you to actually start your own network?
I have no idea how I became a CEO. Theo will probably answer this better than I will. He's like, "Oh, you've been a CEO for a long time." I remember when you were trying to spearhead a whole bunch of stuff, right? He's seen me from back in the day to now. I never woke up and thought, "Oh, I want to be a CEO," or "I'm going to be a CEO." This, I have to say, was kind of a natural progression of my life learning. I think my intention in life was, I am a leader. I'm a natural leader. I do like to start things. I'm passionate about innovation. I'm passionate about technology. I'm passionate about storytelling. And so bringing all of those things together, this just became kind of a natural fit. Really, the story behind Reverie was almost more inspired by Aaliyah to an extent, because she was encouraging me to get the new Apple TV 4th generation 5 years ago. This is October 2015, right? She bought it before I did, and she's like, "Oh, it's super cool." She knew I had all the old versions, and I had the Roku stick and the Android stick. I had all the toys. I like to play with all the toys. And I bought the new one because Chris, who's also my partner of 12 years, our chief business officer, he broke his phone. We had to go to the Apple store, and that was when you got your screen fixed at the store. And I bought one of them because I was just sitting there playing with it. I'm like, yeah, screw it. Package it up. Let's go. I want to take this home. I went home, and of course, the newer Apple TVs, the one with the black remotes, the 4th gen or higher, they came like your original iPhone did, which it only had the 5 basic Apple apps. And then you'd go on the tvOS app store to search for apps that you love. So of course I start looking for LGBTQ apps. Nothing, not a single thing popped up. And that's when the light bulb went off. And then I called Aaliyah back and I was like, I have an idea. What do you think about this idea? And then I'm like, let me get Chris in the living room. Let me get Aaliyah in the living room. Let me have a little dinner party with LaShawn, right? And the 4 of us all came together and I told them this crazy idea that I had. And they were like, let's go. I'll let Aaliyah tell her perspective on it, but that was it. And that was, it's hard to even think about, but like November is our 5-year anniversary since we've had this idea.
That's so amazing. Well, Aaliyah, I do have a question for you. Can you talk about your journey, or I guess your day-to-day as the COO, and I guess how you bring your perspective into your position?
Sure. So I like to think of the COO position as kind of being like the one who keeps the train on the train tracks. So there's so many different things that go into actually having a TV network like we do. I mean, multiple channels now. And our VOD offerings and our third part. Like there's just so many different factors. And so my job, I literally spend the day, even though we're in COVID and everything's virtual, hopping from department to department to make sure that everyone has what they need, to make sure that everyone like is on track for what their goals are, is on track for making sure that they can, my job is really to support, right? So Damien is the big idea man. He's got all the ideas. He gets us he shows us the vision. And then my job is to go through and like make sure that that vision is being executed. So going from each department to department and making sure that everyone has what they need to be able to actually, get things done. So that's what I like to think of my job. So instead of hopping from like department to department, I hop from Zoom to Zoom now.
Thank you so much. So I do have a question for both of you. How do you make sure that you are actively implementing DEI perspectives in either of your roles and throughout the company?
Absolutely. So I do a lot of the hiring. So obviously that's very important and top of mind for me. I'm always thinking about making sure that we have diverse perspectives within the business. As Damien kind of mentioned, there's 4 of us at the top. So naturally our business was born from the idea of diverse perspectives offer a greater opportunity. And we know this. When you look at studies, when you look and pay attention to what it looks like when there are women-led organizations, what it looks like when there are organizations with underrepresented founders, we know that they do better, right? So for me, from the top down, when I'm looking at hiring for both employees and for interns, I'm always looking for diverse perspectives. So like you might have your usual questions that you get in interviews, which might be, oh, what's your greatest strength, right? But I'm also thinking, because we're a media business, what was your favorite thing you watched during COVID? Tell me about who you are. Tell me about what you think. Tell me about how you think. Because if you're on our team, I want to know that I'm not going to have the same perspective every time. And I think that's what's so important about looking at not always going to the same pools of talent, because I think a lot of times what happens is people are isolated and not able to reach into certain different fields because the people who have the jobs, the people who are making these hiring decisions are only looking at what their networks are. So we're often and always looking at extending our networks, meeting new people, finding organizations like ANY, and bringing in people into our organization because 1, everyone deserves an opportunity, but 2, having those diverse perspectives within our business just makes our business better.
Absolutely, that's amazing. Damien, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, echo everything Aaliyah said, and she is the best at hiring. Look, at the end of the day, again, this is kind of going back to like what I was saying at the beginning, diversity breeds innovation. There's a Sheryl Sandberg, Aaliyah, you'll probably remember this better than I will. The COO of Facebook, who was on, what's the name of that podcast? I'm going to look it up. I'll put it in the chat afterwards. Or do you remember what it is, Aaliyah?
Masters of Scale.
Masters of Scale. And she talks about, Aaliyah and I have had multiple discussions about it because it's very inspiring, right, for us. And look, and she's like, a woman who is, was one of the biggest COOs in the world leading Facebook, but like her whole perspective, which we didn't adopt, we already knew this is who we were from inception, was never to put the same race or gender or orientation in the same team because it'll breed the same result. But if you put different perspectives on that team that you're hiring for, they'll challenge each other, and then they'll have this whole new, I'm doing the Rubik's Cube, but like this Rubik's Cube will be solved a lot faster, and we'll come up with new innovative ways to tap new revenue, to tap new marketing, to tap new people, to tap new audience, like all of these different things. You got to think like the biggest and most bold think tanks were never one person, right? It's multiple people and it's multiple perspectives that are able to breed that innovation. And we've always known that. It's who we are organically. It's who we are at the top, right? And I think that has been, I think, our biggest success. Why you've seen, Theo specifically was mentioning this in our pre-chat, why you've seen it grow so quickly, like scale way faster than other media companies, because we constantly are challenging and checking each other. And that's the team that we want. And to also give you some statistics, I think right now we're at about 70% of our employees are people of color, 60% are women, and 60% are LGBTQ. And again, that is because we have organically looked always for the best talent and the best people, but we've also looked at all perspectives, from the person from the community college to the Ivy League film school, as they like to call it, right? And ironically enough, it's the ones that have the least access that are the most innovative, the most creative, and take the most ownership over the role that we're about to give them. They surprised me 1,000 times over, the kid who's coming from that brand name school.
It's amazing. I love every bit of this. Can you guys talk about your journey throughout emerging media and maybe some obstacles you guys have endured amplifying these lesser known voices that are having a hard time already being heard in entertainment?
Sure. So, I mean, I know for me in particular, so I know Damien mentioned that I'm an ally to the community, and personally, I've always known and understood the power of media. It's always been super important to me, and I've always wanted to work in entertainment specifically for that reason. We always say here at Revry that we know that representation saves lives. And it literally saves lives. It shows you that you are not alone in this world, no matter where you live literally globally. You are not alone. There's someone else who can look like you and love like you and identify like you. It's so, so important. And so for us, we really, from the beginning, we were intentional about making sure that we were bringing on stories that represented the entire community. And a lot of times we understood that those stories were sort of hidden away, right? A lot of times they might have found themselves as a digital series on YouTube, but unless you had that specific URL or your friend was the one who made it, there's no way for you to find it. And so these were incredibly important stories that we knew needed to be told and needed to be shown to the world and needed to be known within the community. And so we took it upon ourselves to go through and find and source all of these amazing stories that really showed the breadth and beauty of the entire queer community and brought them onto the platform. And so a lot of times, now you see that diversity is a really big talking point, particularly in front of the screen. We can have another conversation about what's happening behind the camera. But, for us, from the very beginning, we were always doing this and we were always paying attention to this. And so a lot of times for us, it was about searching through, doing the work, finding those. And then for us really going through the process.
I'm sorry, Aaliyah. I think you're cutting out a little bit.
Hold on.
Oh, you're back.
Is it better now?
Yeah. Oh, no, it cut off again. My apologies. Oh, no.
Are you using your phone as your mic? Let's see. Damien, you're muted.
I'm muted, so now that's my fault. That's my fault.
Sorry.
Are you
Can
back?
you hear me now? I just put my AirPods in.
Yeah,
I wasn't touching anything, and I was like, "What's happening?"
You're back.
Okay, good. So yes, basically, long story short, we've always championed and highlighted and focused on these stories that were not being told and that you were not seeing in mainstream media, and it allowed for us to really speak directly to the community. Damien, you can continue.
No, I was just in case the audio I was gonna like
Yeah.
I agree 100%. I mean, Aaliyah knows like some of the stories, and I think I talked about this before, that like I'll give you some examples of the impact that Reveries had, sometimes without us, most times without us even knowing that we're having an impact. When we first launched the service, you know, we started the idea, it was 2015, November 2015. We finally came out of beta, meaning like we came out of a prototype situation. We're ready to start, you know, marketing and telling the world that Reveries here, we're queer, go download our app, watch our content. And that was at San Francisco Pride in 2016. Like we drove, Aaliyah and I, Chris, we drove up to San Francisco, printed our own pink t-shirts and handed out flyers in Dolores Park, you know, where everyone was partying the day before the parade. This was on Saturday, the parade's on Sunday. And we're like, check out our app. You should download our app. And like, people are like, oh my God, what street team do you guys work for? What marketing agency? And I'm like, no, I'm the CEO, and that's the COO, and that's the CBO over there. And they're like, wait a minute, you guys are like handing out flyers and marketing your own app? And I'm like, yeah, we really believe in what we're doing. And by the end of the day, there were like a few people who were like, can we get a photo with you guys? And we were like, this is very surreal. Like, we're like, no, just download the app and please tell 10 friends, right? Like, do that. And, you know, yes, you can have a photo, but that's not the important thing, right? It was really kind of, it was kind of a strange moment. But by the end of that weekend, we, through a friend of a friend, were interviewed by a queer writer who wrote for Macworld, who was Oscar Raimundo, who's still a friend, who, Macworld, you know, is the biggest Apple publication in the world for editorial. And it came out about a month later, and then there was this explosion of, you know, 5,000 downloads and like thousands of new subscribers, and people just watching the app and commenting and liking and sharing. It was the, you know, the big engine that started the whole wheel. And the first letter that came to me was from a young boy in Saudi Arabia. I'm assuming he was a young boy. That's how I characterize him, but I actually don't have data to prove it was a young boy, but a boy in Saudi Arabia who basically wrote me a private message on LinkedIn who said, I'd never seen a gay film before. I'm a closeted Muslim man who lives in fear of being out one day because it's still illegal in my country. I didn't realize that there were other people like me out there until I saw the Macworld article, downloaded your app on like a VPN, which is private, and watched so-and-so movie. And I was like, guys, this is crazy. Like, we just helped someone not feel alone in a part of the world we've never been to. None of us have ever gone to. And it hasn't stopped there. There was an opportunity last year where I got to go, I had the privilege of speaking in Mumbai at the LGBTQ Film Festival in India last June of 2019. And at the opening night, they asked me to come and like say a few words. And then I had all these queer female Indian filmmakers come up to me, and they were like, oh my God, we loved this one project that we were distributing called The Other Love Story. It's a queer female kind of lesbian story that took place in Bangalore that was half in Hindi and half in English. But it was like really well produced, beautiful, amazing, one of my favorite stories. But it was so impactful for that community of queer women in India. And to give you context, like they only decriminalized LGBTQ the year before in 2018. So, you know, so they're like, they had their Stonewall moment like only 2 years ago. And this is like a year later. And this was such a big deal for them to connect with me and tell them like how excited they were about Reverie and like how that we were distributing like Indian queer female voices. And they, you know, I'm like, yeah, what project do you have? Like, let's license it. Let's do more. Right. But then this one woman pulls out her phone to show me her Tinder. And I'm like, whoa. Like, why are you showing me your Tinder app? And she's like, I just want to show you the impact that this one title and you distributing it on Reverie has had for me. And she shows me her profile, and you know, Tinder's really like the only, I think, app for queer women in that territory. And she funnels women who love women, because that's the translation with Hindi, right? And all of the images on the grid were still images from the other love story. It's how they identified themselves in fear of discretion for their job, their families, you know, whether or not they were out or open, and they would be accepted. But how else could they connect with other women that they want to potentially date? They use images from this project. And I started crying. I lost my shit. I always say I woke up, Aaliyah, Chris, and LaShawn. I was like, guys, you guys, like, this is nuts. Like, look what we've done in a part of the world that we didn't even know existed. And I was lucky enough to be the one to travel there to hear this story. But that story to me is the biggest reward, the biggest gift for the 5 years of work that I've done, and that Aaliyah and LaShawn cumulatively that we've all done together, because those stories are the things that feed us the most, because it's showing, it's proving that we are having positive impact and change for our community via storytelling.
I'm gonna jump in here really quickly. We had a question in the chat that I think is a good connection to what you were just talking about in terms of acceptance globally, right? Those markets are changing. People's minds are being expanded, right? And I think the question here in the chat is, you know, what challenges have you had, or something that has made you question what you stand for or your identity, right? And so I know that both of you stand here as folks that are solid in not only your identities, but like being able to root for an other, right? But you may not have always been that way. And so tell us about your kind of identity development, being able to stand up for who you are so that you can stand up for other folks. And I'll let Aaliyah go first, because I know that, you know, especially in this space, people are always asking, well, how can I be an ally? What does that mean? And you know, how does that affect who I am as a person? Right. So
Yeah.
we can start there and move the other way.
So when I think about my identity, and I'll make this like as brief as possible in terms of me and sort of getting my start in terms of being a bit more outspoken when it comes to social justice issues. The first part of my education, so like elementary through middle school, I went to a predominantly Black schools. And when I went to high school, I went from spending my entire experience being in predominantly Black areas where everyone kind of looked like me and identified like me, and you know what I mean, to going to a school where out of 900 students, only 9 of them were Black, and 5 of them were in my class. And so in having that experience, I remember I'm kind of the person where if I don't think about it, I just do things, right? So I had a friend who, she and I both came from the same middle school into that high school. It was our freshman year, and it was like, we just started, right? So syllabuses had just came out. So like you just started to see what you're supposed to learn for the year. And my friend was in a history class, and her history teacher was leaving out anything that was connected to Black history, any and everything. And she was like upset about it. And I was like, what's going on? And then she showed it to me, and I said, oh, no. We're not doing this. And so mind you, again, I was a freshman in a school that I didn't know no one. I did not know any administration. And I ended up finding myself in a meeting with the principal for a class that I wasn't even in, talking about how we needed to adjust the syllabus. And from that point of like starting that organization, or from that point of having that meeting, it birthed starting an organization within that high school around specifically acceptance between people and acceptance for different folks within the school, and creating peer educator groups and doing things like that. So this is kind of inherently who I am. This is who I've always been. And so, you know, being an ally for me is definitely 100% all about what would I need. If somebody else was able to stand up for me, I take myself out of my, you know, my position, and I go, what would I need? And then I do that. That's how I always try and think about it, because I think sometimes we overthink being an ally of like, okay, I've got to get it right. I've got to like do this. It's like, listen and then do. Pay attention, listen to the voices of the folks who you're trying to help, and then do. but don't sit around. Like, you can only, like, I feel like this is kind of a place where we're in right now, is a lot of people are learning and reading and doing things, but they're not necessarily actively doing things because they don't know what to do. If it was you, what would you need, and do
Snaps on that.
that.
Yeah, exactly. And I do want to just call out Aaliyah for a second here. There's an amazing Cheddar interview that she did. It was the first week of what would have been, Pride Month, but it ended up becoming, obviously, I think, a crucial moment in the BLM movement. And it was the blackout day, right? And Leah was booked, Reverie was booked, Leah was booked to go on to talk about our Samsung TV launch. And we wanted to take this moment to stand for something. And she adjusted the entire conversation to be about what it is to be an ally in this moment right now, and professionally what it meant to her. And that interview like practically went viral. And I encourage folks to just Google Aaliyah J. Daniels Cheddar interview. It is super powerful. And I think one of the proudest moments of our company. Anyway, so I like to put her on the spot and talk about that, because it's like one of my favorite pieces of press Aaliyah's ever done, because it really talks to this point, right? And what it really means to be an ally from the social standpoint. I have a different story. I'm an immigrant from Canada whose family was an immigrant from Italy. My parents built a family business for themselves. My dad immigrated when he was 7 years old during World War II from Italy to Canada. I immigrated when I was 18 years old to the United States because I wanted to be in acting. I wanted to be in entertainment. That was a whole other lifetime ago for me. I always say that's like 20 plus years ago. I was not a very good actor, but all those skills, definitely I figured out, oh, wait, this is part of being a CEO, is acting, and sales and marketing and technology, right? Like, this is where like life taught me how to be a CEO. I had a different pathway, not school, to be completely frank. And look, everyone has their best way to learn. And depending on how that is, you take everything that you've learned and then eventually you figure it out sometime in your 30s, maybe early 40s. And you're like, hopefully you figure it out at an earlier age. And you're like, oh shit, this is the thing that I love. This is the thing that I'm really good at. These were all those like things that didn't make sense before in the past. Anytime I'm talking to students, I say fail over and over and over, and fail big, fail like multiple times, because your failures are your greatest learnings. I was lucky enough to have a lot of failures, which brought me to where I am today, right? But from a social justice, and a social impact kind of standpoint, I recognized my privilege as a white, cisgender gay man, that media was completely focused prior to Reverie on one aspect of our community, and that was not the whole story. It's never the whole story. It's a fraction of the story. But the reason why was because there was only data on that one segment of our community. And so if there's only data on that one segment of our community, then the rest of it just somehow doesn't exist, right? And it's because none of the, whether it's, any of the big data collection companies or Nielsen's or Greystone or whatever you want to say, none of the media data collection companies were recognizing minorities. The only ones that were the not-for-profits like GLAAD, which has a study that comes out every year about representation in media across the board on LGBTQ people, and from all different races and cultures and backgrounds and genders and sexual orientations. And so I saw an opportunity here that was not about me, but it was about other people. How do I be an ally to the rest of my trans brothers and sisters, my POC LGBTQ brothers and sisters, like the ones from other countries, the people that have never really had that opportunity or that voice? And how can I lead this? How can I lead this charge? And how can I think bigger and bolder and be more vocal and more disruptive? I sometimes I'm on a panel and people, not this one, but like people hate me because I'll call them out. I actually was literally on a rehearsal for a panel today, sponsored by MasterCard. And in this panel, they were basically we don't want to talk politics because it's a taboo topic because we're a financial institution. And I'm like, why? Why can't we have this conversation right now? What is the problem with having this conversation? What are you afraid of? And they gave the stereotypical, like, very standard corporate answer. Well, we just believe that it's just inappropriate, and we want to just focus on XYZ goals, and yada yada yada. And it's in those moments where I think like disruption and these conversations are what makes change, what breeds innovation, what these conversations we need to be having. Because if we don't have these conversations and you do sit in a position of privilege over another minority or group, then how can anything ever change? It can't. It's stagnant, right? And so I want to be a champion for that. And I want to make sure that our organization, our platform, our leadership, our employees, our content, our marketing, all from top to bottom reflect what we're saying we want to do. And that at the end of the day is, why, again, people are so receptive to who we are, because it's an authentic brand. Everything we do is authentic to who we are. So that's a very long way to answer that question.
No, it was perfectly clear, because my next question was actually, as students or as professionals, how do we find our own niche in business where we can actually advocate for others and be a good ally in both in business or maybe in other majors and other career opportunities as well? How do we, I guess, find that niche and that balance between the two without, I guess, generating that type of corporate response that just stays there?
I think you have to be really unapologetic. I think you have to stand in what you believe and be really unapologetic. And there's going to be moments where like, be smart, say that. But you have to know what you believe, and you have to be willing to say something. If you're in, a group or an organization and you look around and everybody looks the same and you're really seeing a missed opportunity, don't be afraid to be like, hey, have you all considered, hey, where you're referring, like where are you getting your employee referrals from? I've got this really great organization you could consider, right? So don't always necessarily come with a problem, come with a solution, right? Because a lot of times if they feel like you're coming to them and you're saying, oh, you're doing this wrong, then folks are gonna like have an attitude. But if you come to them and you say, hey, I have an idea. I was noticing that maybe we could have a bit more diversity in our organization. And here's a couple of places where we can maybe source some talent, right? Then you're coming to them with a solution. You're also showing this is important to you and you're part of their workforce, right? And then follow up. Don't just give it, follow up. Be like, hey, I noticed that there's an opening in marketing. And I just want to make sure that you all, we're checking out this. Like, don't be afraid to like stand forward, because a lot of times the reason why things don't change is because someone doesn't say anything. And I also think that right now we're in a position where, people are actively being really intentional about DEI work. And so not only like, and there's a lot of lip service going on. So if you're in the actual workforce, you can actually say, hey, I'm here. I know you said you want to, remember when you guys put out that press release? Remember, I saw it was an amazing article you all wrote about how we're doing this amazing thing in the company. I've got this great idea to help us do that. Like we can do that. And so that then, number one, you beautifully and very politely called them on the promises they've now made, but you've also given solutions to help to really, really encourage making a true change within the workforce.
I'm gonna jump in quickly. And maybe play devil's advocate, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of our fellows are hitting the ground running. It's going to be their first internship, their first time in a corporate space potentially, right? Mm-hmm. So you may not be able to have all of that mobility when you first start in a job. But I guess my question to the both of you is what are you looking for when you hire someone, whether that be for full-time employment or as an intern? And then if you could speak a little bit to kind of the varying opportunities that are just in the entertainment space overall, right? Because you all are a streaming platform. So in my mind, I'm thinking not only like production, but I'm like, somebody has to like code the website, and that type of thing. Like, I know Damien doesn't know how to do that. So he definitely has someone do that, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, you're right. I don't.
tell us a little bit about who you're looking for, what skills or things that they are able to do, and kind of the different avenues that entertainment space might have. And then we'll open it up for questions from the audience as well.
Sure. Damien, I just spoke last. I don't know if you want to say something first.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, like, because you do a lot of the high. I have my,
Yeah.
my question. I think.
Yes.
But yeah, okay, I'll start, and then Aaliyah will. I mean, because Aaliyah does most. But for me, and it's funny, I was having this conversation with somebody a friend on the weekend who's like going through job interviews. And look, startup culture is very different than corporate culture, right? So I just want to make sure we are identifying. We're talking from our experience, which is startup culture. In startup culture, we have less than 20 employees total with our interns and the 4 co-founders, right? So look, I think the exciting thing, I've always worked in startup. I worked one corporate job my entire life. It was for General Motors, for GM, for auto shows, implementing live streams from auto shows domestically and abroad. I even had to go to Detroit, Aaliyah's hometown, for like 2 weeks for like corporate training. And it was super fun for the first like 20 minutes. And then afterwards, I was like, oh my God, this is like super siloed and it's not my personality. I did it for a year. It was great experience. I'm very glad for that experience that I had that. But it's definitely something that I didn't respond to as an employee. And it's because I like to innovate, because I'm an inventor, right? And so with startup, you get to do that, right? Even from an intern level. You may enter an internship, let's say in marketing or in content, and I'm just using Reverie as an example, but then you may get hired in product, because during the course of your 3 months or your 2 months that you're interning with us, we may realize, oh, Sally's skill set is way more better. Like, she actually knows how to code. She didn't have that in her resume and she didn't say that in her interview, but like when she's actually in the marketing department, she's like, oh, I can fix this like code right here. Let me just go in, blah, blah, blah. And boom, I've now, recoded and retooled that web page on your WordPress. And we're like, mind blown. And we're like, oh, let's put Sally in product. There's an opening in product. Sally, you've got a job. Do you want a job? It takes some time. And I would say, like, have the patience of allowing the employer to figure out where your skills are, because they may not be in the place where you think they are or where you're walking into. And it may take a minute for them to understand where your skill sets lie. And sometimes that's even with employees. We've shifted employees multiple times because it took us a minute to figure out, like, oh my God, this person is way better at editing. Let's put them in marketing to do all the creative editing for this one project because, they have that skill set. But the biggest thing that I would say just fundamentally is, with startups is you're never going to do one thing. You're going to do a lot of different things. And you've got to be open to taking on different roles and different tasks and wearing multiple hats. I find that very exciting. I've never been a siloed, like, here you go, Miss Daniels, here's your paper, and now here's the report, right? Like, I cannot do that. I would go, excuse my French, fucking nuts if I only had to do one thing. I love to do multiple things. And that's, I think, what startup world is really exciting and is really all about. So if that's what you want, if you want to learn a lot of different skill sets, go and intern at a startup like Reverie. And we'd love to have you. And the one question I always ask in the interview is, why do I want to spend 12 hours a day with you? There's no right or wrong answer to that question. If anyone does, who's on the line, interview with us, it's not a gotcha question. This is not like a, personality test I'm asking you to like fill out, and then there's an algorithm that's going to spit out whether or not, Theo is the right personality for this role. No, that's all bullshit. It's really just like, because this work is so intense, like, I want to know that you're a self-starter, and you want to take ownership, you have a commitment to the cause, and the cause is always bigger than ourselves. And I think all of the employees at Reverie know that, and that's just inherent. It's not something learned, right? They realize, oh my God, we want to be part of this mission. We want to help change representation. We want to feed that funnel. We want to they're on the same pathway. They have the same vision that we do. And to me, that's the answer to that question, right? Is being a part of that. And you could be an ally, and you could be like, you could be any acronym and have that same cause. We have allies that work for our company outside of Aaliyah that are so cause and mission focused because they want to support this community, like just as much as the queer person does, because they're connected in some way, their brother, their sister, their aunt, or themselves. And that's super important to, I think, us when we're looking at who are, at least me, when I'm looking at who we're hiring. Aaliyah will talk to more the practical sense. I'm like more like the airy fairy.
That's hilarious. I think I would echo Damien's statement regarding flexibility, because it is a startup, and startup culture is very different than sort of corporate. It's not a siloed situation. I realized I didn't want to work in corporate when I worked at NBC Universal, and I was like, I only get to know one part of how this one thing potentially maybe happens, and I was like, that's it. That's all, it's like, I love knowing the way the whole machine works. And I think in startup, you're not just a gear. You can see how the whole machine works, and there's a chance that you might get your hands on all different parts of how the thing works. And so I would say being flexible, being willing to be flexible, being willing to try new things. We all kind of start out and think we know what we want to do with our lives, and haha, life happens, and then you realize you don't. I went to law school. I was a lawyer for like 7 years, so there you go. And so I think being able to be flexible, that's really important to me. Having some type of connection, being mission driven, knowing that it's important, knowing that you don't want to just go collect the check, right? I think that's really important. It's that you actually want to do something that's changing the world. And because of the work that we do with Revry, we are constantly getting that confirmation that we are actively and actually changing the world. And so being able to know that that's what you're walking into and you're doing it for that, not just your check, then I know that you're going to work just as hard to make sure that we're actually continuing to make that thing happen. So for me, I'm always looking at, are you flexible? Are you willing to try something different? Are you willing to learn a new skill? And to speak to Damien's point, at Revry, we're more likely to move you into different positions to try you out, because if you believed in us, we're believing in you, and we want to make it so that you want to stay with us. We're building relationships with our employees. And so that's something that you're not necessarily always going to see from other companies, but that's actually really important to us at Revry. And so we're willing to figure out what's the best fit so that you can stay with us and we can all grow together.
Awesome. We're coming to the top of the hour, so I do want to have one or two folks from the chat be able to answer a couple of questions if they have some. Just as a reminder, we have folks that are our mentors, so they're coaching someone through our amazing fellows program. We have fellows themselves. We also have fellow alums as well who have graduated from our program. I see that Chelsea has a question. She's one of our amazing mentor coaches, so I'm going to let her ask her question. Thanks.
You're too kind, but I figured I should be on video to ask a question. Otherwise, it feels a bit weird. Recently, you may have read, but I think I read that Disney is putting disclaimers on some problematic animations or movies from the past, saying, at the beginning, please watch out, this is not representative. And so I wonder, in terms of queer media or LGBTQ plus representation, how do we heal? How do we, go back in time and say that Nip Tuck was problematic? Everything is pretty much problematic, even when it comes from people like Ryan Murphy, who's part of the community. I guess I'm just wondering, how do we not let it sit just with Revry? How do we spread it out so that everybody knows not just the harmful things, but can educate themselves on doing better?
That's a great question. That's a beautiful question. And I think that's a challenge that everyone's trying to determine right now. I think part of it is you have to look at the history and understand where we came from, but then you have to keep challenging in the present time. So when you see things that come up, and I think part of the challenging isn't just saying, you made this thing and it's completely inappropriate. It's also challenging who's in front of the camera, but I am always advocating challenging who's behind the camera. Because a lot of times you're telling storylines, you have nobody in the room who has that lived experience. And so they're not going to be able, there's no one vetting it, right? And so we consistently, and I think we see this when we look at a lot of times what's starting to happen in Hollywood, where these bigger stars are requiring that there's folks in the room who actually have these experiences, paying attention to who's the lighting person. If you got Black folks on the screen, making sure that they know how to light Black skin, because there's a difference, right? Paying attention to who's in the room when certain decisions are being made. And I think you just keep challenging. And I think For us, Damien and I, part of it is doing exactly what he said, which is disrupting. It's going on these panels with these big guys at the big companies and saying, hey, you could do better, right? And not being afraid to say, hey, you can do better, and calling them out in very public ways. Damien and I, neither of us have shame when it comes to things like that, because at the end of the day, there's a bigger mission of like creating media that doesn't harm people, right? And so I think it's consistently challenging not just what things look like, but also challenging the entire process. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I completely echo Aaliyah. I'll give you an example. Like I'm asked to be on a lot of these, to be completely frank, B2B, business to business, industry driven, typically all white, older, cisgender, straight men panels. Aaliyah, they'll ask once in a while just because they're like, oh, we need a woman, or we need a woman of color, right? And we constantly are the disruptors on these panels. And you know what, I'm going to take your question and I'm going to start asking that question, because that's a great question, Chelsea. And I thank you, because that's extremely thoughtful. And I wrote it down. I'm like, oh, I'm going to keep this one in my back pocket for later, because this will be a lot of fun when I'm on that panel with Disney one day. I'm going to ask that question. And then I'll make sure I have your email and I'll send you it so you can see the response. It'll happen. Trust me, Leah knows and Theo knows. I'll make that happen. But look, for us, I can only talk to the point of Reverie. Our original content is the true reflection of who we are. And for the vast majority of it, almost all of it, it is made for and by our community, and specifically the community that it's representing, whether it's that trans story, whether it's that lesbian story, whether it's that gay story. And look, for me, even as a gay man growing up, and I'm 39 years old, you know, my reflection of gay men in media was Jack from Will and Grace, you know, who is extremely a caricature and an effeminate person, which again does not reflect the what all aspects of gay men look, walk, talk, and sound like. Or it was overly sexualized, and it was like the American version of Queer as Folk, which was just sex, 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 which is totally not our culture, right? You'd be surprised how many times I've been on panels or in front of investment people like VCs, venture capitalists, or angel investors, and they ask me, how much pornography do we distribute? I'm gonna let that land for a second. And I'm all like, and I literally have to, like, you know, Aaliyah will see it bubbling up and she'll be like, don't do anything, because we still got to get that check, right? And at the end of the day, the change comes from my education, not my emotional response. So I say politely, we actually don't have any pornography, but let me tell you, we have Lexus as a sponsor. We have Disney as a sponsor. We have Gilead Pharmaceuticals as a sponsor. We have Dollar Shave Club. You know, we have Stoli. We have all these Fortune 500 brands. Do you think that they would want to associate themselves with pornography? Probably not. So if we've closed them, then what do you think the opportunity is if you give me a check to close some more? It's the education and the evangelist work that we have to do to train folks who have no clue and who do not know how to answer those questions, who do not know what to do with those questions, and also don't realize the harmful effects that they have when Ryan Murphy, and I'll tell you, Ryan Murphy has changed to an extent, not advocating for him, when you look at something like Pose, because Pose, to me, that's one of my favorite pieces of television, period, right now. And it has been since it's come out. And we're very close to, we've met like Stephen Canals, and we've met, you know, MJ, we've met a lot of the cast members at different like LGBTQ events. Angelica Ross, we just honored at QueerX. You know, that is the first time Ryan took his privilege and stepped into the showrunner, the crew, the writers, the directors, the producers, the music was for and by the community. So change can happen, and it will happen, but it's going to take folks challenging the ones at the top, that status quo, and calling them out publicly in a place where you really can't do anything about it now, because at the end of the day, data doesn't lie, and the minority will become the majority. You know, that's it. And if you are not marketing towards or understanding what that minority audience authentically wants to see on screen, and how they're reflected from start to finish, what they call bottom line and top of line, right? Top of line's in front of the camera, bottom line's behind the camera. Then you're never going to resonate with the audience. A great example, of this is Quibi, an extremely inauthentic brand with people who had all of the, like so much capital. It was Hollywood's billion-dollar experiment, right? But like, was there anything ever authentic about Quibi or that brand? No, not even close. It failed before it even began. And we saw that. We would all talk about it. Everyone in the industry would talk about it. But unfortunately, like, they're so clouded at the top to understand what the vast majority of, like, the average consumer, the people who are, buying this content really want to see and how they want to see it. And the last thing I'll leave you with, and again, I love data. Data drives me in a lot of ways. 1 in 5 millennials identifies LGBTQ. 1 in 3 Gen Z identifies LGBTQ. But 52% of Gen Z do not declare their gender or sexual orientation. Huge, right? And millennials make up 55% of global consumer purchasing power. And when Gen Z, because Gen Z is only about like 12 to 22, as they grow up, let's just get to 2030, when they're graduating college and they're buying cars and getting married and having kids and buying their first home, Gen Z and millennial will make up over 72% of global consumer purchasing power. So if Tide ain't figuring them out how to become mission driven and speak to all audiences, they won't exist in 10 years. They cannot exist in 10 years because they'll get shut down by the demographics.
I think that's
Thank you. And just to quickly save myself, also a huge Ryan Murphy fan for Pose, but you're right. There was a significant shift in queer characters as a characterization and joke to an actual authentic storytelling in Pose. But so much to unpack there. We'll probably need hours, but thanks so much to both of you.
Let's do it. We'll go to coffee or something.
category is.
Yeah, Billy Porter is my favorite in the whole world. Like, I love him so much.
I was gonna say, as you were wrapping there, in terms of having brands recognize demographics and all of this, right? I think it's one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure that we had this discussion in the month of October as we close out LGBT History Month. I think it's really important for spaces and places to just have opportunities to learn. As people were coming in and out of this session, the biggest thing that they've said is like, hey, I've learned so much. I wasn't thinking about this, or you opened my eyes to that. And I think that that's really important because that's exactly what this month is supposed to do for those who don't take any other time to do it, right? Like if we don't do these things on our own, there's a dedicated month for us to make sure that it happens, right? But I think that this is a thing that we continually learn throughout the year. I do want to make sure that we stay close to time, respecting your time and ours as well. I want to give you all the opportunity to tell folks exactly where they can find Reverie, because we didn't do that plug yet. And then I also wanted to give a shout out to Emily for doing an amazing job in facilitating this event as well. So I want you to give a shout out to Reverie, and then we'll close out for the evening.
Cool. So you can find Reverie.
Go ahead, Lillian. You do it.
So you can go to reverie.tv to watch the service. And actually, we have live linear 24/7 channels you can watch completely for free. You can subscribe to watch VOD, but you can watch free content channels just like cable all day, every day. Plenty of content to watch. And then on social, we're at Reverie TV on all social platforms.
Awesome. I want to thank you all for spending a little bit of time with us. It's been fun. We have to do it more often. For current fellows, we'll be making sure to stay in touch with both Damien and Aaliyah to let them know about anything they have coming up, whether that's shows you might want to watch or opportunities that you might want to apply for. Again, we're in this virtual landscape, so they'll go coast to coast if you go coast to coast. But either way, we know that the business of representation is important, and that these are some people that are actually making it happen. So with that, I'm gonna end the recording. I'm gonna ask our guests and co-hosts to stay on just a quick second, and we'll chat soon, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye.